But people should understand that there is no new Detroit. It's just Detroit, and it's ever evolving like any living, breathing, feeling organism.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Your Daily Detroit. It is Thursday, August 10th, 2023, and I'm coming to you from the campus of Marygrove, where I just talked to a wonderful person, Sam White. She is chief cook, bottle washer, all the things at Shakespeare in Detroit. And there is a wonderful series of Tempest that is coming up that I wanted to tell you about and tell you a little bit about their 10th anniversary. That's quite an accomplishment for any organization, especially a cultural organization. So let's have that conversation.
My name is Sam White, and I am the founding artistic and executive director of Shakespeare in Detroit.
So let's start with the grander scale and talk about Shakespeare in Detroit, 10 years. What an anniversary, and also to be contributing to Detroit's art scene for so long. How does that feel, and kind of what have you learned along the way?
It feels good to be celebrating 10 years. It's quite a feat to celebrate 10 years when you're in the arts and culture industry or any industry, because most entrepreneurial efforts only make it 18 months, I think is the statistic. So we feel very lucky. I feel very lucky to be able to say, happy anniversary, everybody. It's a very big deal. And because Shakespeare in Detroit has experienced so much. We had our very first show August 14th, 2013, which was 3.5 weeks after the city filed for bankruptcy. So it's quite extraordinary, I think, that was our starting point. And now, having survived the pandemic, we're celebrating an anniversary. And so it's a really beautiful time for us because we've affirmed how resilient we are. We have no debt. And our work is getting better and better in these 10 years. So we're thrilled and grateful.
What are some of the things that you have learned along the way that maybe you can share with others? Because 10 years, I feel like there's some stuff that you've picked up.
Don't spend more than you have if you're a theater organization. And brick and mortar do not make a theater company. The people make a theater company. Brick and mortar gets old. It needs repairs. It needs care and contractors. Theater, though, the actual art form of theater, needs heart and people. And that's sort of what the Greeks established along thousands of years ago. And that's what Shakespeare in Detroit believes. And that's how we were able to make it through the pandemic without having to ask for any grants and without having any debt, is because we never spend more than we have, and we never have what we don't use. And those things have helped us be resilient no matter what.
That really, as a creative myself, that really resonates with me because it's about the community that you build. And I think so many people get obsessed with having the physical plant, the biggest thing, the whatever. And at the end of the day, it's about the audience, the customers, the listeners, the patrons, all those sorts of things,
That's right. And I've read a lot of articles about the American theater and New York Times and American Theater Magazine, et cetera, about the struggle to get butts and seats, physical butts and seats at theater companies. And fortunately, and we say this with great humility, we have not had that issue at Shakespeare in Detroit. And I think a lot of that comes because we, for our summer shows specifically, which we're about to have or open in just a day or so, is always accessible to folks with no formalities. And so people, whether they can afford a ticket or not, are able to come to the show thanks to donors and supporters and all of that. And so, yeah, we've learned that it's important to focus on our audience rather than like plumbing and chimneys and floors and faucets. Yeah.
I was at Broadway earlier this year, saw a Broadway show, and you were talking about accessible theater. So let's talk about that to somebody who's used to dealing with theater in kind of that context. What does accessible mean to you? What does that look like in reality if someone's never gone?
Yeah, accessible for me, I think sometimes when people say accessible, they mean sort of access in that you can see somebody who looks like you on stage. That's always been the case for Shakespeare in Detroit. So for us, that's an old conversation. I know that's a conversation that a lot of people just started having in 2020, but our actors have always looked like the people in Detroit and throughout the state of Michigan. So for us, the conversation about accessibility is more socioeconomic because Detroit and Metro Detroit itself is so, it has these different sort of islands, I call them, right? We have the West Side, the East Side, the suburbs, downriver. Everybody sort of has their plot of land. And for us, access means that we're able to bring all of those folks from those different sections of Detroit and Metro Detroit together. And that's because for our summer shows, we do not charge a fee, right? There's no ticket price. So whether you have $2 in your pocket or $2 million in your bank account, everyone's invited to our shows in the park, and they sit right next to each other. Folks who would never in a million years be next to each other at a show are, in fact, next to one another at a Shakespeare in Detroit production. So for us, it's always socioeconomic. And the socioeconomic is also, it includes non-hierarchical practices, meaning you don't have to make a reservation. Because we had someone who asked if there was a reservation process involved for the free show. And the answer is no, because that wouldn't be accessibility. Some people do not have internet access, right? So they wouldn't be able to go online and give a digital reservation. So accessibility means that socioeconomics do not play a part in whether someone can experience Shakespeare in Detroit, specifically for our summer shows.
That makes me think of some of the different ways of bringing people together across the country. You think about regions that have transit that mixes people together, or different kinds of events that mix people together. I feel like that's extremely valuable here in Metro Detroit, where, and depending on where you live, it's so easy to never see your neighbor. You could have a tall fence. You could walk your dog and not talk to someone. There's so many ways in Metro Detroit to not interface. And I think these common grounds, are so crucial.
I think so too. And that's one of the reasons we like being at Marygrove, is because Detroit Youth Choir is right underneath us. So we can hear them singing when they're rehearsing, and they can hear us acting or sewing when we're sort of pushing the pedal. It puts us in community, just in our day to day. But for our shows, it's amazing, because for that very first show that we did at Grand Circus Park in 2013, we had folks who did not have homes who were there, folks who, in fact, lived on stoops just right outside of Grand Circus Park, and folks from Canada to Canton who were sitting all together. And I think they realized, especially during that time, that we need each other. Right? The DIA was about to have a garage sale on Picasso and Matisse. And I think everyone saw the urgency around supporting arts and culture, whether they were someone who wasn't as socioeconomically inclined as someone else. Everybody showed up for Othello. And I think that's the beauty of Shakespeare in Detroit, specifically our summer shows.
Now, having kind of seen some of your work over the years and heard about you and all these other things, you are an extremely talented individual. So why Detroit? Why do you pick here? You seem like the kind of person, the world is your oyster. You go anywhere you want to go. So why Detroit?
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess I don't think of myself in that way. I think of myself more as a daughter of Detroit. I was born and raised on West 7 Mile. Have been there my entire life because I now own my childhood home. I pay taxes at that property in Detroit. So when I say that I'm a Detroiter, even when I leave, because I just left the Stratford Festival to direct a show there, I always come home. I pay taxes here. I go grocery shopping here. My nephews are here. My cousins are here. And so no matter what sort of opportunities come my way, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere, I always come home because it's the thing that created me. I sound like I'm from Detroit, and I try to always make sure I sound like I'm from Detroit. When I notice my voice changing, I'm very conscious of it, and I try to make sure I keep my very Detroit accent, especially as my Canadian friends say. And I also, because my mother and father were so special, and my mother in particular, who exposed me to Shakespeare, I learned about Shakespeare on 7 Mile. I feel like my feet, are in the dirt of Detroit. My roots are there. I'm like a tree from 7 Mile. And so it's important that the fruit that I bear be in my hometown. That's why we have the kids, as we speak, right underneath this floor rehearsing for Macbeth, is because I'm paying forward what my mother gave me on 7 Mile in Detroit.
What's something that other people need to know about creativity in Detroit?
Creativity in Detroit is alive and well, and it always has been. It's never gone anywhere. There's more buildings. That's sort of my what I was speaking to about theater not being brick and mortar. Detroit isn't about brick and mortar. It's about the talent, the people, the creativity, the music, which is why our Tempest is dedicated to Juan Atkins, the godfather of techno music. It's about the paintings that people draw on the street corners, the theater that people make, right in their backyards, or, borrowing someone's gymnasium. It's about the people. And so I want people to know that the last 10 years of Detroit's journey have looked very different. And the journey in Detroit for its citizens is ever evolving, because the city looks totally different than it did when we had our first show. The queue line wasn't even finished at that particular point. But people should understand that there is no new Detroit. It's just Detroit, and it's ever evolving like any living, breathing, feeling organism.
So let's talk about that summer series and what people can look forward to. I was looking at some of the stuff I'm excited about it. Can you outline it for people?
Well, the Tempest is going to be extraordinary. The Tempest is inspired by Juan Atkins, as I just mentioned, who is the godfather of techno music. He is a magician through and through. To be able to think of those sounds and those beats and that cadence in his head and bring it to the world, I think he and the other members of the Belleville Three just speaks to how incredible Detroit is. And so the Tempest is dedicated to him. He's coming to opening night. The show has a live DJ actually on stage as the Shakespeare is playing, and we have dancers in our show. We have a JIT expert. If you're from Detroit, you know what JIT is. And so if you come to see the show, you're going to be blown away, not just by the beautiful verse as Shakespeare wrote it, because we still speak verse and prose as William wrote it. It is shortened down to about an hour and 45 minutes. But if you love music, if you love dance, if you love Detroit, and even if you're a little iffy about William Shakespeare, you're going to feel differently about the Bard after you see this show, because it's a celebration of our 10 years. So come dance. Oh, and I can't forget, there's a dance contest at the intermission. The first 5 minutes of the intermission are going to be a dance contest, and you can sign up for the dance contest with the volunteers before the show, dance with the live DJ during the interval, and if you win, you get $100 cash for the dance contest. So people can expect a lot of fun. It's going to be a party. It really is.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What made you tie together Tempest and Techno?
Because I really do admire Juan Atkins. I just think he's cool. DJs are cool in general. But I think about the Movement Festival, which, everybody goes to in Detroit every May. There would be no Movement Festival if that sound didn't exist, and that sound wouldn't exist without Juan Atkins. And when you think about Shakespeare's story, Prospero is a magician who gets banished to an island by his brother Antonio, and he becomes an expert in this magic that he's been studying ever since he was banished. And so when I thought of some of the most incredible, inspirational, magical people in the world, folks who can do things that other people can't do, Juan Atkins was at the top of my list. And I thought, our Prospero is going to be inspired by a real-life magician, Juan Atkins. And then the island is inspired by, for anybody who remembers in the late 80s or early 90s, there was a TV show. It was originally called The Scene in Detroit. They shot it in Highland Park. And it was on a local station here in Detroit. It eventually became the New Dance Show. And so our Spirits of the Isle, the dancers, you'll see some of those freestyle moves from specifically Lawanda, Kiki, and Yvonne, who were three of the very popular dancers on the New Dance Show. If you know, you know. If you don't know, do your research. And so we have three dancers in our show, and you'll see some of the moves from Lawanda, Kiki, and Yvonne featured in our show at Campus Martius.
And if people want to go to that, what do they need to do?
If you want to go to the show, all you have to do is show up. I would suggest that you bring your own blanket or lawn chair. The show is totally free, and it's free because the Gilbert Family Foundation has paid for the show because the show was expensive, but because they endowed us with the ability to give it to the community free, it's free. But please bring your own blanket or lawn chair because the chairs will go fast, and so get cozy, bring your favorite blanket, bring the kids because it's for all ages, and have some fun with us. No reservations necessary.
Sam White, thank you so much for your time on Daily Detroit. I really appreciate you and all you've done.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Daily Detroit. As always, feedback 313-789-3211 or dailydetroit@gmail.com. The Friday show will have a different lineup than usual because it's August. Things got to switch up a little bit to make up for schedules. So Cheyenne, producer Cheyenne, and engineer Randy will be joining us to talk about a bunch of fun things for the Friday show. I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, with that, I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody. We'll see you around Detroit. You know, everyone, I wasn't going to do a show today, but it happened. This is what happens when you love the thing.